Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Conlang Case Study. And it's a reasonably special episode as well, because as of this episode, this series has been going on for over a year now, which is nonsensical. If I wasn't doing this in this format, I would be long finished by now. But as it is, it still looks like we've got many months left, maybe even another year, who knows. And before we properly jump in, not only would I like to give another thank you to all of my wonderful patrons, but also, for those who missed the announcement on my most recent video, I would like to bring your attention to the Conlang database project, which is an endeavor started by a handful of people in the Conlang community that has just received sponsorship from the Language Creation Society, and it will be hosted on their website. And essentially, it's just a database where anyone and everyone can input information about their conlangs. You can provide a link to a Google Doc or some web page if you have one, and you just fill in basic information about your conlang, what type of conlang, who are the speakers, all that stuff. And all conlangs are accepted regardless of their level of development or purpose or what have you. So any conlangers watching this, feel free to follow the link, which I will provide somewhere, wherever YouTube actually allows me to post it. So feel free to go there and get your conlangs added to that spreadsheet. And with that out of the way, let us resume. So, first of all, one item of follow-up from last time. So in the last episode, I made the decision that the agent of a passive is going to be marked with the dative, because I brought up that in a causative construction, if both the agent and the object are marked with the genitive, that will inevitably lead to ambiguity. But several commenters pointed out that that's not necessarily a problem. There are lots of natural languages that are happy to leave that ambiguous, or have some other clarifying strategy like word order or something. And while that is entirely correct, I still do like the idea of using the dative, just as a quick and easy way of sorting that ambiguity out. But I will say that we don't necessarily have to choose one or the other. It could be that the agent of the passive could be marked in either one or both cases. Maybe the genitive is the default marking, but if any ambiguity arises, then you can use the dative. I think that's pretty believable, because there are lots of times in languages there'll be situations where there'll be some sort of more generic or less specific strategy, but then you can apply some other strategy to make it more concrete and more clearly understood exactly what you mean. And I'm trying to think of an example. I guess it's kind of like in English, the word with. We use it both for the comitative and for the instrumental. So you can say, I cut the bread with the knife, or you can say, I'm going to the park with my friend. The first one is an instrumental, and the second one is a comitative. But just in case, for whatever reason, you really want to reinforce that this is an instrumental with, you can change it out for, I cut the bread using the knife, and that makes it perfectly clear. So that's the sort of thing I'm thinking about for this, but it'll become more clear as we actually take the language forward and once we get into actually making example sentences. But for now, back to where we left off last week. So you'll recall that right now I am trying to find some decent phonological forms for the verbal auxiliaries, which are really going to be like the backbone of the entire grammar of this language. And they're also going to be by far the most commonly seen words, so I really, really want to make sure that I like the sound of them, because we're going to be seeing them a lot. So I have had a few idle thoughts about this in the meantime, and I've realized a couple of important things. Number one, something that I think I forgot to take into account last time, is that because of the way the stress system works in the proto-lang, where the penult is stressed if there's a long vowel. So like for this one here, where we have the base form is asya, and then with the reduplication the vowel is lengthened so it becomes asya. Then once word final vowel loss happens later, then that will inevitably mean that this auxiliary will have word final stress, always. Which isn't a problem, it's just something to keep in mind. And the other thing I realized was that I had actually misremembered or incorrectly carried out the sound changes. Because one of the things that I was hoping to accomplish was to get some SK or SQ clusters in there, which is what this auxiliary was sort of based around. However, if we just say that the pronominal prefix, let's just say it's ak, then applied to the auxiliary, that would be akasya. So then there would be vowel loss between the voiceless obstruents, and also that palatal s would just turn into a regular s. Now, what I thought would happen last time was that we would get the metathesis, so that would just turn into aska. However, looking back through the sound changes, I realized instead what would happen, when word final vowel loss kicks in, that does actually give us word final clusters. I'm just so used to thinking of things in terms of nakashti, where just all word final clusters are just completely disallowed. So then it would go from aks, and then when metathesis happens, we would get ask, and then, here's the cool part, we would get the epenthesis to break up the word final cluster. We would get asak, and then the S roticizes between voice segments, so it becomes arak. Now, I do really like that. I think it's really cool that akasya can become arak. I like how completely the S infixes there, and we get this nice ra infix. That's cool. However, that means that this auxiliary will not, in fact, give us any SK or SQ clusters like we wanted. Unless the only way to prevent that would be to say that there is actually a long A there, or if there's some sort of consonant at the end that blocks the word final vowel loss so we never get that cluster and we never need to break the cluster up. Another thing I've realized is that with this auxiliary, the ya one, I originally thought of it because I wanted there to be nasal plus L sequences, and by using ya, the second ya would just turn into a regular Y afterwards, which is better than having two L's in a row. But the more I've toyed around with this one, the less I like it. And even though I do like the nasal plus L sequences, I don't really like anything else plus L. And also, when we add in some of the other stuff that's going to come in the verb complex, some of the suffixes that are going to come afterwards, then that L, when it clusters, will resurface. And I really don't like the sound of that when I tried it out. So that one we are just going to straight up destroy. The problem with adding a consonant or a long vowel to the end of this is that would mean it would also need to happen here as well. And that would mean, again, let's just use ak as an example for the pronominal prefix. That would mean the long stem would pretty much always be akasan, which is 3 syllables, which could work, but I feel like these auxiliaries are going to be used so often, they're going to get worn down quite a bit, and I don't know, having a big, bulky 3-syllable word with a long vowel in there, that just seems a little bit much. And I do really like that infixed R. I think that's really cool. So I'd like to have an auxiliary that does that, but the auxiliary that does that can't be the same as the one that gives us the SK clusters. So we're going to have 2 different auxiliaries that have an S-type sound. We'll take that N off for now. So just for fun, if we did that with the long stem, we get no clustering because it's a long vowel. So we have an alternation between arak and akas, which is pretty cool. Ooh, that's another thing. Here, I've got a palatal S. I've got a sh. And according to our sound changes, palatal consonants cause rounded vowels to become fronted. So, for example, if we change that to asu, then that palatal would front it to asu. And then the u at the end, with umlaut, would cause the A to front to an E, so it would become SU. And then later on, the E would cause the U to unround, so it would become E. So we get SC, which would just become SC because the palatal just turns into a normal S. Actually, wait, no. Because, I keep forgetting this, high vowels block rounding harmony. So the U would just stay as an U, even though it would turn it into SU. And then later on, E turns into so it would become USU. Man, this is hard. I feel like I'm running laps around the vowel quadrangle. And basically, all of the same changes would apply if it was ASI as well, because that would cause the A to front. It would just remain unrounded in the final syllable. And while that could potentially be interesting, I'm still mindful about this word final stress that happens with the long form. Because for some ineffable reason, if there is going to be word final stress, I'd like the stressed vowel to be R if possible. So I don't want to front it if I don't have to. So for that reason, I think we're going to just stick with an R vowel. I'll also say a slight amendment to our sound changes that I've been thinking about. I haven't fully committed to it yet, but right now we have it so that the palatal stop goes to Y when not clustered and to T when it is clustered. And while that is cool, it's also pretty common from what I've seen for the voiceless palatal stop to turn into an S. And if that was the case, imagine if we had it so that if, when clustered, it became an S. That would mean that between vowels, it becomes Y. When clustered, it becomes S. And then after word initial and word final clusters are broken up later, it becomes R. So we get this weird alternation between Y, S, and R, which is really weird. So if we said that these auxiliaries, instead of the palatal fricative, if it was a palatal stop, this would be the same, it would still be arak, but this, instead of being akas, would be akai. I think I like that one a little bit better, just because I do quite like word final diphthongs. We'll play around with it a bit, but I'm going to pencil that in. And for this pharyngeal fricative, we threw that in because the pharyngeal fricative, the voiceless one anyway, turns into an H, which can then cluster with these resonants, which is a very nice cluster that I'm looking for. We will not have the same infixing take place as it does with the Asya auxiliary, because it will never get to the point of actually forming any word final clusters with these. If it comes after an obstruent, it will just make a geminate, and I can't imagine the language will ever, at any stage, allow a cluster of a resonant plus a pharyngeal fricative to come in word final position. So a single vowel will suffice. Oh, and I forgot as well, with the, again, if we just say ak, if we had akha, then the pharyngeal plus the K turns into a geminate Q, so it becomes akka. So if we just went with that and reduplicated that, oh, and I forgot again that the K will need to have a vowel coming after it in order for it to be licit in the proto-lang, because we have only allowed resonant codas. So it would actually be akka. And that won't really be a problem for these ones, because if you have a word ending in A and a following word beginning with an A, I can see them just melding together into a short vowel. That won't affect anything. So then with the reduplicated form of ha, the stress is on the antepenult if the final three syllables are short and open, which they are, so it would be akahaha, which is horrendous. But then we would have vowel loss between voiceless obstruents, which in the unstressed syllables would be between the pharyngeal fricatives, so then we get a geminate pharyngeal fricative, then the voiceless pharyngeal fricatives just drop to a regular H, which, because this is an auxiliary, and these things are going to be used so frequently and get worn down so much, I could see that losing its gemination and just becoming akaha, or even losing the H entirely and just becoming aka. We've got that word final stress again. But then of course we have word final vowel loss, so it would just be aka, which it would still be stressed on the last syllable if the H is actually dropped. I shudder to think at how I'm actually going to record the stress pattern in the romanization, because we've already got diacritics going on all over the place. Oh well, we'll get to that. So I don't like that stressed final short A. So if we throw consonant on the end there, if we say that there's a word final N, that will block word final vowel loss. So depending on whether or not we wanted to keep the H, it could either be akahan or akan. Either way, I quite like that. And again, just for fun, the short stem, you get the vowel loss between the voiceless obstruents, which would then turn into a uvular stop cluster, and I think that would be that. So we'd have akan versus akan. So if we went with these, we'd have our 4 forms for whichever person this would be. It would be arak, akas, or akai, if we wanted to change it to a palatal stop, akan, and akan. And again, I like that stressed R in the final syllable, the long R. Because if I used any other vowel in this auxiliary, keep in mind, because it's a pharyngeal consonant, that will drag high vowels down, and in the proto-lang we only have 3 vowels. So if it's an E, it will become E, and if it's an U, it will become O. Again, I think I'm just going to keep it as R, just because I really like that final on. Oh wow, on. I would make a refugium reference, but unfortunately I'm not allowed to talk about that yet. Okay, so actually, those are both pretty solid, both in the short and long forms. So we do have 2 complete reduplicative forms. We don't need to resort to suppletion, at least not yet. We can still use suppletion for person, not just for aspect. So we can definitely sneak in some more forms if we really want to. And immediately what comes to mind is that blasted SK cluster, or SQ, which would be even better. And the only way we can do that is to have something like that, where we've got an S and a consonant blocking the word final vowel from being dropped. I do think there might be an overabundance of A here, so I'd want to use a different vowel for this one. Because if we use I, that will front the preceding vowels. And if we use U, that will... well, actually, no, it won't round the preceding vowels, because it will be in an unstressed position, so it will unround. But it always unrounds, because this language doesn't have U, it just unrounds to in all environments anyway. And besides, U is immune to and blocks rounding harmony. Okay, let's actually start tabulating these forms. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that this 5th suppletive auxiliary, for now let's just say it's sin. What does that do for us? Well, the protoform would be akasin, which would then become aksin, which would become askin, but also the I would front the A because of umlaut to become eskin, but also the A then drops to central vowel, so so it would be uskin. Uskin is okay. Actually, let's not have N be the final consonant. Let's just say it's a long I, because I don't want to just have the same ending consonant as this auxiliary. So let's just say that it's C. Replace that. Word final vowel loss shortens all long vowels, so it just becomes uski. That's not bad. But what if it was su? How would that affect things? Protoform would be akasu, and then the modern form would be, once the vowel is lost and the metathesis happens, it would be asku, but then u unrounds to be aska. Aska is nice, and again, the u does not spread rounding harmony because it's a high vowel, so the R would just remain R. I think I like aska better than uski. Now, out of curiosity, if we made that akka with a uvula, would anything be different? The only real difference it would make, other than swapping out the velar stop for a uvula stop, is that in this one, the Q would cause the final E to become It would drag it back because of uvular coloring. But other than that, they're pretty much exactly the same. We do have that nice SQ cluster there, which is on my wish list for this language. But I also like the alternation where the K is going to the geminate Q here. So I like both of these. But in fact, they are not mutually exclusive. We can have both, because after all, we've got... how many of these things? We've got 10 pronouns that we need to make. So I'm sure there's room for both of these. But of course, it's not just going to be a difference in consonants. We can also change the vowels that come before it as well. So let's test out ika and uka. The R there doesn't really matter because it's just going to be lost pretty much immediately because of the vowel loss between the obstruents. Oh, actually, I just realized as well. Hold on. In our vowel system, the E is a neutral vowel, right? Yeah, and it's transparent to harmony. So that being the case, outside of umlaut, does I actually spread fronting harmony? Because I'm trying to figure out if that would be ikas or ikus. Because the I would front the R to an A and then the A would go to I think if it is in fact a true neutral vowel, then it'll just leave it as ikas. I hope so, because I like the sound of ikas better. That's a weird one. I'll have to come back to that. Okay, that actually affected things a lot less than I expected because of the fact that the E is neutral. As far as I can tell, all these R's will just remain as R's. They don't get fronted. And again, the U, since it's a high vowel, it doesn't spread rounding harmony, which makes no sense to me, but that is apparently how these systems tend to work. Okay, what if, just to shake things up, what if we had a voiced pharyngeal fricative word initially? Because then the voiceless pharyngeal is one of the consonants after which high vowels lower. So we would pretty rapidly get a roka. And since the O is a low vowel, that will spread rounding harmony. So let's see how that affects things. See, in that case, now we have that final R turning into an O. So we have okos, okon, and okon, which I don't like as much. From the way things are going, I think I prefer the su auxiliary to the C auxiliary, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and say that is going to be our 5th auxiliary for when we need something suppletive. I've just seen I did it again. That's not right. Stop doing that. It should be iruk and uruk, which again, both sound pretty good. See, all 4 of those are pretty solid, and it almost doesn't matter which one we go for, so I'll choose some more specific forms later, but there's a couple of other ones I want to test out first. First, if we have a nasal coda, and in that case we wouldn't need a following vowel, because resonance can serve as codas even in the protolang, and in this case we wouldn't get the metathesis. We would just have the M and the S clustering, and then the S turns into a vowel. So we get amra. Amra is nice. And that will contrast with amas, or amai, if we go with the palatal stop. I do actually really like amai. The more I think about it, the more I like the idea of using the palatal stop instead. It wouldn't really affect anything, it would just change all these final S's to Y's, so we can tack that on later. So that would give us an alternation between amhan and amhan. And I feel like the H's would get lost in that situation, but I do like the MH clusters though. I don't know why, this could just be phonetic bias on my part, but I really want to keep the H in the short stem, but lose it in the long stem, just because as I sound it out, for some reason that just seems easier. It seems easier to catch the H when it's not in a stressed syllable. So amhan is nice, but amhan, for some reason, feels very strongly to me like it would just go to aman. And if I really wanted to force it, I could say that that is actually ama. If there was actually another vowel in there to space those pharyngeal fricatives out, then they would never come in contact with the M, and we would still get aman. So I'm going to go with aman because I like that better than amhan. A potential problem that I'm seeing is that the Asya auxiliary and the su auxiliary, when there's no obstruent there to perform metathesis, we've got amra and amra, which are pretty damn similar. Well, I mean, this one is going to be suppletive after all, so it's not like it's going to be particularly prominent. I think we can get away with that for now. So if I change that to an E or an U, will that actually affect anything? It will, because of umlaut. Because the umlaut happens before proper front vowel harmony kicks in, and that applies if the I is in stressed position, or final position. Which, for example, looking back, like here, that would be ikahan, and because the I is in stressed position, that would in fact turn that A. First of all, it would front it to an A, but then, both because it's coming after a uvula and because A just does this automatically, it will turn into an So it would become ikan. But here it would stay the same, because the I is not in stressed position in the protolang. But over here it would, because it was ikasu, so it would become isku. In that case, let's try it out then. It's not too much different. Well, that gives us a slightly more distinguished difference between asya and su, because we've got imra and imri, which are a bit more distinct from each other. Let's go ahead and try as well. Yeah, all that really does is drop out the initial A for an I think I might actually like that one the best. I think it sounds the nicest, and I think we need to use more of these these schwas or central vowels, especially in stress positions like here in umra. Also want to try a liquid coda. Once again, you get the vowel loss between the resonant and the obstruent, which would originally be arsa, but then the S would rotocize between the voice segments, so it would just become arra, with a geminate R. And then this one wouldn't really change much, it would just go to arhan, which I really like that. Arhan. That is right in the sweet spot of the phonesthetic I'm going for. That is wonderful. That's so good that let me just think about it quickly. If this was ir, then that would be irhun, which doesn't sound nearly as good. And if it was an u, it would be urhan, which again doesn't sound as good. So I'm not even going to bother trying different vowels for this one. I'm just going to say that ar is the one for us. But once again, like the ones up here, I'm just thinking that in the long stem, the H just gets lost and just becomes aran. And once again, the asya and the su auxiliaries produce pretty similar results. I might want to stick some sort of consonant at the end of that. We have to be careful though, because if it ends in an obstruent, then it's going to need to have another vowel after it, and if that's the case, that's going to result in a stress shift, where it's the su bit that gets the stress, which means we'll have to redo all of these, and it also means that we're going to get more word final stress. I'll have to think about that. Again, this is just a suppletive form, so it's not even going to show up for all the pronouns, so it's of lower priority. Another test. What about voiced stops? Because they don't cluster with obstruents at all. So there's a bit of a problem here where the long and short stem in this form are going to be identical. Oh wait, no they won't. There'll be a difference in stress, because this is adahan, which becomes adan, and this is adahahan, which becomes adan. And again, because of the phonological reduction from frequent use, I think we can justify that long, unstressed final an being shortened. So just adan. Contrast with adan. Okay, that's cool. And if we do all the sound changes, this one, adasu, should become adara. But once again, phonological reduction, I really want to say that the D and the R come together into a cluster to give us adra. I actually really like that as well. I might play around with the vowels in that one a bit more, but for now I'm coming to the end of my time, So I'm going to stop it there for today. But thank you very much for watching once again, and tune in next week where hopefully we can actually finalize some of these and get some pronouns going. That should be fun. Alright, thanks very much. See you next time.